Hi, and welcome to the April blog from Gordon Boxall, Director of Enabling Good Lives in Christchurch. And I'm delighted to have with me today John Grant. John is the General Manager, I think is the title, of Skillwise here in Christchurch, an important provider, organisation involved in I talked at the last blog about flexible disability supports, and John might be able to talk a bit about his organisation's involvement with that. And John's also been representing Inclusive New Zealand on the local leadership group in Christchurch since it started. So it's good to see you again, John, and we've had a local leadership group meeting today. Always a robust conversation, but as always, although representation is from disabled people and families and provider organisations amongst others, we tend to get to a consensus. Everyone, I know you always bring us back to the Enabling Good Lives principles, but based on those, we usually get some harmony in terms of what comes out of those conversations. So perhaps you'd like to say a bit about your organisation and your involvement with Enabling Good Lives.
Well, look, thanks for having me along today, Gordon. And yes, I certainly agree. The advisory group meetings are always interesting and I think do contain some really robust discussions and debate. But we do always come back to some level of consensus, and I think that's really important. And I think probably how that is achieved is through the principles of enabling good lives and making certain that we come back to those as we wrap up our discussions through the course of our meetings. But just to say, I suppose, a little bit about Skillwise. I mean, we're an organisation that, in the scheme of things, a relatively small organisation. We've been around, in fact, this is our 25th year of operation, and so we're planning a bit of a celebration for that later on in the year. I think as an organisation, even before Enabling Good Lives came to town, I think we held some of those core values and those core principles that are integral to the Enabling Good Lives approach, particularly around ensuring a person-centred approach to how we work with people, and fundamentally ensuring that people have choices and are supported to make decisions about the things that they want out of life. And I think that's really important. And so, we I think sometimes have struggled to really operationalise those principles, and that's something that we've been really quite intentional about over the last few years in terms of making certain that the way that we work, that our systems and our processes are very much reflecting those core principles. I think with recent developments around flexible disability supports, I think that allows us to kick that door open a bit wider in terms of working in a more flexible way and in terms of encouraging more collaboration, which we know is really fundamental to ensuring that people are supported to have a good life. And so I think that previously I think there's been some issues and challenges around how to work more collaboratively. And I see collaboration not as something that is exclusive to the provider sector, but indeed needs to radiate much further. And so, one of the things that we've been quite intentional about over, a number of years now is to have, a wide range of connections and networks and relationships across the community and across society. If you have as a key principle inclusion, well, it makes perfect sense to ensure that the relationships and the networks that you develop along the way are diverse and cut across the community.
So under flexible disability supports, rather than, if I put it crudely, getting lumps of money to support groups of people, you're now working in a much more individualised way so that the person with a disability and their family becomes the customer. Have you got any examples, John, of how that's worked really well within your organisation?
A number of examples really. I think the one that probably sticks in my mind, and this is an example that I've used a bit over recent times, is where we had this is not under the new flexible disability supports contract, but this is just an example of how we've evolved as an organisation in our thinking and in our support practices. So, a young man, or two young men who were wanting to be involved in something that enabled them to further their friendship, and that also may, contain some opportunities for work experience. So both these young men had an interest in cars, and so through a contact from one of the staff at Skillwise, we were able to set up a work experience opportunity for these two young chaps at a car wreckers. And so, we had a kind of I suppose a loose sense of direction, but we wanted to just make sure that there was flexibility and scope for things to kind of naturally evolve without too much kind of direction from us. So as things unfolded and the project that they were working on was to strip down a car and to rebuild it as a derby racer to be raced at the local speedway. So that was fine, and we thought, well, there's an opportunity obviously for these guys to kind of get together based around their interest in cars. There might be some skills that are developed along the way that could perhaps lead to some employment opportunities, and off they went. Probably about 3 or 4 months into this project, it became apparent that one of the young men was really interested in racing the car. So the original plan was that the guy that owned the car wreckers who raced cars would himself race the car. So that was kind of presented to me as well. Actually, things are starting to move in a slightly different direction, and that this young chap was wanting to race the car. And of course, I suppose in this day and age, unfortunately, probably the first thing that we think about is health and safety. And what are the health and safety issues here? And I'm sure you can appreciate there's probably a multitude of health and safety issues. But that challenged me to kind of take a step back and think, well, let's just take it one step at a time. Let's unpack this, see what's needing to be done. Let's tick off the health and safety stuff, get that out of the way, then focus on some of the practical things that need to happen to enable this young man to realise his dream of racing a car at a speedway. And so driver's licence, that was pretty key. So we managed to tap into some funding to enable him to complete his driver's licence. And again, I think this just showed the power and the importance of relationships, whereby the driving instructor donated a significant number of driving lessons because the funding only went so far. And once he got to know this young man and his story and what he was striving to achieve, he donated, I think, somewhere in the region of 10 driving lessons, which is, comes at a pretty significant cost, really. So, long story short, the car was built, ready to go. The owner of the car wreckers had his own private little racetrack, so we were able to do some practice, some test laps, so to speak. And then, that finally culminated in this young man racing at Woodford Glen Speedway. I mean, the story doesn't end there either, so, I can let's fast forward a year, and so, this young man now has full-time work, so he was working part-time, very part-time, and he was also a person that struggled with verbal communication, and somebody that others would describe as sort of being non-verbal. Well, the progress that's been made in terms of his verbal communication is without any intervention from a speech language therapist, is remarkable. So he's somebody now that can converse quite easily and comfortably in a verbal way, and has a full-time job as a car groomer. Has his own car, so we very rarely see him these days because he's out there, having his good life, really. And as I understand it, he was in a few months back and informed us that he's bought his own car wreck that he's got at home that he's working on to build as a racer. So look, I think it really just, to me, that emphasises just the power of relationships, and also having a can-do attitude, really, and just allowing people the time and the space to get on and do what they want to do.
So it's a great example. It's also a reminder, this isn't enabling good lives doesn't suddenly mean that everyone gets the access to a good life. Good providers and families and people, individuals have been doing this for a long time. What enabling good lives is trying to do is bring all the best of everything together so that people can have much more choice and control over what they want to do. And it's also a reminder of how we look at someone probably in their current situation and don't think beyond that. So getting a plan supported with a good provider or navigator or family or school, however that happens, and having belief in that individual, that actually realising their dream means that we can go along with things and try things out and take some risks and manage those. But it's a lovely scenario, and I think it's all power to Skillwise for supporting that possibility. And let's hope that there are many more. I talked at the last blog about flexible disability supports and providers, including Skillwise, and I think 10 others that people now can work with to get a really individualised service and support arrangements, including buying things, for example, in line with some purchasing guidelines that I'll talk about in a minute, and therefore building that good life as they go with the support of a good provider organisation, which is absolutely suited to some people who may not want to do everything themselves, although that option remains available, of course. So we're very excited because it just completes the jigsaw as we see it in terms of purchasing options that people have within Enabling Good Lives. So just to say a little bit about the purchasing guidelines, because we've had John Wilkinson, a key colleague from the Ministry of Health, down visiting us today and talking about the latest draft of the guidelines. This is a real balancing act in terms of government feeling comfortable that its resources are being used in line with, in fairness, legislation, because it has a legal requirement to be able to do that, in a way that is still freeing up the opportunities for people, so it doesn't seem like they're wading through treacle to understand what it is in terms of the things that they can buy. Now, clearly, the guidelines are still going to be fairly written in bureaucracy. We'll look at once they're finalised. We've had some input and discussion today, which John will take into account with his colleagues in the ministry before they're finalised, and then we'd hope that we can get some easy read version, perhaps from people first, drawn up as well, so that we make it as straightforward as possible for people to know what's okay to be purchased in terms of services or supports, and what clearly is outside of those guidelines. Did you have any comment on those, John?
Well, look, I think that we had a fairly wide-ranging discussion around the guidelines today, and I think for me it's really important that any new system or policy or process that is developed through Enabling Good Lives clearly reflects the principles. And sometimes that they may be more implicit than explicit, but I think that we have a responsibility to ensure that whatever the system is, whatever the policy is, whatever the process is, that the principles are front and centre and clear to all. I mean, because we're so close to it, we can perhaps see it more clearly where perhaps those principles are implicit. But I think that we want to engage a much wider audience in terms of the ongoing development and evolution of an Enabling Good Lives approach. And in order to do that, we need to make certain that the principles are always there, always present, and very clear.
Thank you. And perhaps finally for this blog, we also have our own lives. Now, John and I are great cricket fans, and overnight is the semi-final, the big semi-final between New Zealand and England. Do you want to make a prediction, John?
Well, I think we better have a $10 bet on this, Gordon.
Okay.
$10 that the Black Caps are going to prevail over England. It's on camera now. So
I think I win either way, but I equally lose either way, I guess, is the other way of looking at it. But my glass is always half full, so it'll be a great match and a great result. But also, you've had your own... we talked earlier about the contribution from that driving instructor. It's amazing, isn't it, how if we embark on something that is just within our own little silo, then things stay within that silo. But actually, if we open up to community, then we find unexpected consequences and benefits from involving people who are doing their everyday work, but actually go that extra mile. And you went that extra mile this weekend at your gym, if you want to explain what happened.
A very interesting experience at the gym that was certainly outside of the norm for me. Unfortunately, there was a bit of an incident where a chap who was running on a treadmill had a heart attack, and being sort of one of the first on the scene there, as many others were standing back, I was put in a position of having to utilise my first aid training that thankfully was quite recent, and perform CPR on this chap along with one of the gym instructors, and he was not looking in a particularly good way. But with our quick actions and administering that CPR, I'm very pleased to say that that we managed to revive him. He spent the last week in hospital, and as I understand it's coming out today, and is doing very well. So a big relief to know that a difference has been made, and that training certainly came in very helpful.
So you'd recommend that training to anyone?
Yeah, absolutely. And I think that you don't really want to be placed in a position where you have to use it, but when you do, to be able to quickly draw on that knowledge can make the difference between somebody living and dying. So I would seriously recommend that people, if possible, avail themselves of that training. And that was through the Red Cross, and they did an outstanding job of providing that training.
Brilliant, and you did an outstanding job, and well done. I'm sure you're very proud of that, John. So it's fantastic, and it's again just we're in our communities. What can we do? I mean, that's an extreme example, of course, but there are other things I know that we can do that help to make someone else's life that little more easier. Okay.
And I mean, just to pick up on your example there of the driving instructor, I think what that showed us also, Gordon, was that I think there's more goodwill out there in the community than we may think. And often we do encounter barriers that relate to people's attitudes, and sometimes that does present some challenges in terms of people accessing different opportunities and participating. But I think equally, it's not until you start to form some of those relationships that you realise that actually there is a lot more goodwill out there than we may necessarily think.
One of our tests for enabling good lives and the work we do in the local leadership group isn't just the examples we give and the ability to support people to enable their good life, but it's about contributing to evidence so that the government can see that how this approach works and how it can influence the wider system change, because what we're doing is very much for the few hundred people we'll be working with in Christchurch, but it's even more so to influence and inform good practice and what might follow over the next couple of years.
So if you'd like to find out more about Skillwise, you can visit our website, which is www.skillwise.org.nz. It is under development at the moment. We're just doing a bit of an update, so information is probably fairly minimal at this point in time. But however, you can follow our Facebook feed. So on the website, there's a link to our Facebook feed, which is just Skillwise, and we also have a creative space called the White Room that has their own separate Facebook page as well, and that operates largely as a social enterprise. So you can find us at those two places. And thanks for having me.
So just remember to like this and sign up, subscribe. John's organisation will be shown beneath this at the end of this video clip, so you'll be able to see see how you can get hold of the Skillwise address. Thanks as always for viewing this, and thank you particularly for John for coming along today, and the best of luck overnight.
Thanks, Gordon.